Hey everybody, and welcome to Dominion Cards. This is a video series where we take a strategic, in-depth look at various cards from the board game Dominion. Today we're looking at Library. This is a 5-cost action card from the base game. It says draw until you have 7 cards in hand, skipping any action cards you choose to. Set those aside, discarding them afterwards. So what's happening here is that when you draw cards using this, if you are about to draw an action card, you can put it aside and then keep drawing other cards, and then at the end all of the cards go in your discard. So the reason why it does this is so that you basically, if the cards that you chose to skip over went straight into the discard, you could get stuck in like an infinite loop of just skipping cards and drawing and reshuffling over and over again. So although, this card is just a simple case of draw up to 7 and skip action cards, the extra text is just there to make things work smoothly. So this is what we call a Draw to X card, and we're going to talk in general about Draw to X first before we talk about what makes Library specific and unique. So all of this general concept of Draw to X, there's a number of Draw to X cards, and what we're about to talk about now really does sort of apply to all of them. So Draw to X is what we call cards that draw until you have a certain number of cards in hand. So in the case of Library, this is 7 cards. The amount that you draw when you play a Library and Draw to X is going to vary massively based on how many cards are currently in your hand when you play it. So Draw to X really likes ways to make your hand size smaller. Usually, the first time you play one is okay, but if you don't have ways to get cards out of your hand before you play the next one, every future play will be really poor. So if you think about a card like Library, when you first play it, you go up to 7 cards in hand. But if you were to then play a village and then another library, that second library is only going to draw 1 card. All it's going to do is replace itself, and spending a terminal action to draw 1 card is absolutely terrible. So you really want to find ways to make your hand size smaller before you play successive libraries. So how do you make your hand size smaller? Well, the only real way you're going to do that during your action phase a lot of the time is to play other action cards. So you don't start with any action cards. So you want to make sure that you can trash as much as possible. Without any trashing at all, Draw to X is usually really terrible. You just got all of these coppers and estates that you can't do anything with, and they just get in the way. In fact, as you add non-action cards, like specifically like provinces towards the end of the game, these really do get in the way, and they harm your ability for your Draw to X cards to draw well. They just make every successive play a little bit worse as they get added to your hand. So Draw to X is often looking for ways to end the game without adding many victory cards. So either they just want to focus solely on provinces, or they want to find a way to end the game on a 3 pile and only pick up points right at the end, or like big mega turns, which is where you empty the entire province pile in 1 turn, or most of it. If you're going to have a game where you think that there's going to be a lot of back and forth picking up duchies, and you just have this really slow, what I call an extended end game, where nobody dares to pick up like the second to last province because it will just mean the other player wins. Draw to X gets really, really bad in those situations, and if you went for Draw to X and your opponent didn't, your opponent's just going to be able to last a lot longer than you. Draw to X in general is a lot weaker than your more standard forms of draw, like, say, Smithy, a lot of the time. And that is because Smithy doesn't care about your hand size, it just keeps adding cards. And while Draw to X could draw you more cards than a Smithy, theoretically, you've got to actually actively put in work to make that the case, whereas Smithy doesn't care, it will just keep drawing you cards. And so usually general draw is more powerful, and if you had both regular draw and a Draw to X on a board, in a lot of cases the regular draw is just going to win and you won't actually touch the Draw to X at all. It's just a much weaker form of drawing cards. Now, Draw to X does like cards that do not draw other cards, and that is because as you play them, your hand size goes down, and Draw to X can make up for that. So we talked about in our Festival video how Festival was really good for Draw to X, because it's a village, and it gives you money, and it doesn't increase your hand size. So these are all things that Draw to X cards really, really like. So it's like one of the the better draw to X cards out there. It's got everything on it that draw to X likes. It doesn't mean you can't have drawing villages in draw to X decks, but if like your villages are replacing the cards in your hand, then that just means that the draw to X isn't doing as much. So it's just a missed opportunity, I suppose. There are big problems if your draw to X is terminal, which some of them are, and that is that you need way more village support often. So if you think that one way to get cards out of your hand is to play like other terminal actions, like say you have remodels or you have artisans or you have militias, that sort of card that you play, it's terminal, it doesn't draw anything. You need to, if you want to keep drawing, you need to be playing those in between playing your other draw to X. And smithy village engines don't really have this problem. If you think about a smithy village engine that has a load of terminals that it wants to play towards the end of the turn, it will have enough villages to support that. But if you get some of the villages turn up at the end, it doesn't matter because you've got more villages at the start. You can use all of the villages that you gain in the turn early on to focus on playing the smithies and draw everything, and then at the end you have hopefully the spare actions left over to play your final payload terminal actions. But with draw to X, you're looking to play those terminal actions before the library, which means you need to draw all of the villages to support them and play them before playing the library. And that means that they really suffer with villages coming at the bottom of the deck. It's actually a lot harder, unless you have a bunch of excess villages, drawing them in the right order can be a real problem, and you can get very, very unreliable engines because they simply cannot play the draw and the payload at the same time. If they draw all the payload alongside the draw and they don't have the villages at the time, you can't do everything, or your draw just gets a lot worse, and that's a big problem, the draw to X. Now, filtering cards, or what people sometimes call sifting cards, like Cellar, these are really nice with draw to X. So when you play a Cellar, one problem with it is that your hand size goes down, but that's great for draw to X. And what it lets you do is it lets you discard all of those cards out of your hand that you don't want. So victory cards that get in the way of draw to X, you get to just shoot past them and hopefully in their place draw up more festivals and cards like that instead. So these are super great for draw to X. But another thing is that if you are able to get your hand size really low in between playing draw to X cards, you don't actually want that many draw to X cards in your deck. If library can draw at most 7 cards every time you play it, and you can actually pull that off, how many libraries do you really need in your deck to actually draw everything? And the answer is, well, not necessarily that many. But the problem then becomes, if you don't have that many, how do you actually find them to play them, right? If you've got a very low density of draw to X cards in your deck, you can sometimes you don't see them and your turn dies like that. Cards like Cellar are also very good to help you find these cards. You draw up a bunch of cards that you don't want, or that you do want, but you don't have your library. You can discard some of them and try and find your library more. The other thing is, of course, if you get a lot more draw to X cards, then if you have 3 of them in your hand, then the problem comes that when you go to play one of them, it's less effective than it ideally could have been, because the other 2 libraries in your hand are just 2 card slots. That means that it's not drawing as much on that play. So the libraries get slightly worse if you've got a lot of them in your hand at the time. So that's very awkward, and filtering's really, really nice to help sort that problem. Discarding cards from your hand for other benefits. So while cards like Cellar discard them for card draw, there are other ways you can discard cards and get good effects from them. So Plaza is a village from guilds. It lets you optionally choose to discard a treasure from your hand to gain a coffer, which lets you, it's a token that you can exchange for coins at any buy phase. That's just a way, if you haven't gotten rid of all your treasures yet, that you can get them out of your hand and get something for it. So you can amass quite a lot of them. By doing that, you just get big draws, and then you can just keep on discarding more and more of them. Storeroom lets you directly discard cards for coins each. So if you have a storeroom and a library and all the village space to support it, you can play the storeroom, discard all your cards for money except the one library, and then play that library and draw all the way back up again and get like the maximum value out of it. So those let you generate quite a lot of money. Artificer is another similar sort of card. This one comes from Adventures, where it will gain you a card equal to the number of cards that you discard from your hand. And what you really want to do is discard a lot of cards and gain expensive cards. Like a 5-cost card will let you gain another Artificer or another library. Problem is that you need a big hand size to do that, and then once you've gone down to a low hand size, you've got to draw back up again. Well, Draw to X is perfect for cards like that, so that works really well with Draw to X cards. Another sort of thing that you can do, playing treasures. Treasures are often a problem because you can't play them during your action phase, and the action phase is the only time you get to play your Draw to X cards. Well, some cards out there let you actually play your treasures so that you can get them out of your hand and then draw up while it's still your action phase. So Black Market is the typical example of this. It lets you buy a card in the middle of your action phase and play all of your treasures in the middle of your action phase. So that lets you keep going with a treasure-based economy while using Draw to X. Villa is another example. Just let you go into your buy phase, play all of your treasures, and then come back into your action phase. And it's kind of like Festival, which is really good anyway. So like Villa is a super duper Draw to X card. As long as they still exist in the pile, you can keep having these amazing turns early on. So it's nice, like when the trashing is slow, it lets you kick off the Draw to X engine a lot earlier than it might otherwise. Note that I haven't listed Storyteller in here because Storyteller exchanges treasures for other forms of card draw, which means that you don't really need the Draw to X. Like Storyteller's usually a little bit more reliable and better than Draw to X, and so you just wouldn't get the Draw to X in the case of that card. So that's just Draw to X in general. Everything that I talked about there tends to apply to all forms of Draw to X cards. So let's look at Library specifically. So Library draws you until you have 7 cards. This is kind of a lot, right? There is very good potential in Library if you can get it to draw. A lot of Draw to X cards don't draw quite that many, and they tend to be like 6 or 5, but Library is 7, and that's because it's an expensive terminal one. If you think about your starting hand of 5 cards, if you play a Library, you go down to a 4-card hand, and then you draw 3 cards. So it's going to draw you 3 in that case, and that's a lot like Smithy. So some people like to make comparisons that Library, Smithy, you can use it in big money decks like a Smithy card, but the thing is that if you were to draw one of your other libraries, you can skip past it. So it's kind of like Smithy Big Money, but you don't have to worry about drawing your other Smithy dead. Now bear in mind that Smithy Big Money is usually not a very good strategy. So, take that with a pinch of salt. It doesn't mean that you want to be playing big money with Library, of course. But there is value in that if the Library is the last action that you play, you can avoid drawing all of your actions dead and potentially make your way all the way to getting a clean shuffle to try again better next turn. Library at costing 5 is quite expensive compared to its peers. That is because it's terminal, which is quite bad for Draw to X. And other ones like Watchtower does other stuff and it draws to 6, but it only costs 3, and that's a lot better than Library, which at 5 for a terminal Draw to X is just very expensive. There's a lot of cards like Smithy that cost 5, and cards like Smithy are usually way better for draw in a lot of cases than Draw to X. So you're sort of paying a premium for Library in terms of draw. And that's because Library has this other effect, and that is that it lets you skip over action cards as it tries to draw them if you don't want them. So this effect can be really nice. In terms of Draw to X, you've got those reliability problems I talked about where like Seller helps to find other libraries. Library, when you play it, also helps you find the other libraries. So what you can do is you can start skipping action cards until you find your next library, and then you can start like drawing the rest. And it just sort of means that you don't end up with this turn where you draw a load of cards and then you don't find any more draw. Like particularly if you're going for a deck filled with like a lot of festivals, that would normally be the end of your turn. But you can try and prevent that with the library by making it easier to seek out the particular card that you want. Of course, this skipping only applies to action cards. So library in particular really, really dislikes having any cards in your deck that aren't action cards. While that tends to be true for most draw to X cards, it's particularly important for library. Like library hates having other cards in your deck that aren't actions. So you really want to be able to trash them as quickly as you can. Now, it's worth noting that when you skip action cards, you only get to look at them once for every library play. So if you skip over a card and then later on you think, oh, actually, I'd like to draw that card now, it's a little bit too late. You'd have to play another library and then try and find it again. All the cards that you skip go into the discard, which is sort of like putting them at the bottom of the deck as well. So you want to take care with skipping really, really good action cards. It's very important that you keep track when playing library of exactly how many of each of the cards you care about that you own and that you've already seen this turn, and sort of know if any of them are now in the discard or how many of them you've still got to draw. You generally want to do that anyway, but it's particularly important for library. If you have a do-nothing cantrip, so this is the cards that give +1 card, +1 action, and they're not giving you any other effect that turn, you usually want to skip them when you draw these with library. That is because if you put it into your hand and then you play it, you are just drawing another card at random. But library's big benefit is that you don't have to draw cards at random. That card that the do-nothing cantrip would have drawn, if you were still drawing with library, if it's an action, library gives you the option to choose to skip over it or not, in a way that the do-nothing cantrip just doesn't. So do-nothing cantrips, you usually don't want cards that are doing nothing anyway, but library sort of makes it a bit of a waste of time to get them in some cases, because you just won't really play them. It's better to just not put them into your hand. Now, library has one big, major, hidden thing going for it. That is that if your deck consists only of action cards, then you effectively get to search through your entire deck to draw exactly only the cards that you want. So this is what I call perfect draws, and it's a thing that's sort of exclusive to library. So think about that for a second, right? If you're drawing and say your library's going to draw you 3 cards, imagine you got to just look at your entire deck and pick out the 3 cards that you wanted and put the rest back. That should sound incredibly powerful, and that's because it is, right? That's an incredible effect for a card to have. And it's not quite the same as picking up your deck and looking through it, obviously, but you sort of get to do something very equivalent to that. So what you want to do if you have just action cards is, before you play a library, stop and think to yourself, what are the perfect cards that I could draw? What are the absolute best cards that I would like to have in my hand drawing? So that could be 2, if you're going to draw 3 cards, you could say, I'd really like 2 festivals and another library. Well, if you think about that before you draw with library, what you can do is you can then make sure that you get exactly those cards. So you'll keep the first 2 libraries or the first 2 festivals that you find and the first library that you find. And it doesn't matter what order they come in or where they're positioned in your deck. As long as you have them in your draw pile and discard, you will find them. This is where, if you make a mistake in what cards you actually have in your draw pile, you can hunt through all of your cards and be like, oh, whoops, actually I didn't find it. And you don't get a chance to go back and pick something else out. You're sort of just stuck then with the remaining cards at the end. Or if you accidentally skip past all of them, you might not actually draw all the way. If you run out of cards, you just stop drawing. So you might not actually draw all the way back up to 7 again. Now, this has a big problem in that as soon as you add a province, even if you have a way of discarding that province out of your hand, because you are looking through potentially most of your deck every time you're playing library, if that province is back in your discard pile, then as soon as you shuffle and keep looking for more cards, you are very likely to just find that province and draw it again. So as soon as you add any single non-action card back into your deck, you will find it very, very quickly, and it will just clog up your hand size. So library sort of gets real hurt bad by adding in the non-action cards into your deck more so than anything else. You can't just discard it. I mean, you could treat it like another draw to X card, just discard it and then just pick up the next action cards that come along without thinking. But really, when you're using library, you've got this opportunity to draw only the cards you want, and you should really be taking advantage of that. So yeah, it's easy when you just play festival library decks in the base game to get a little bit lazy with the library and just not think about it that much. Just draw some festivals and then be like, oh, actually the last card I just need is a library. I'm just going to look for that. If you try and get into the habit of thinking very carefully about what cards you actually want to draw with library and hunt them down, you will start to realise that library can actually give you this good value. Overall, because it's a draw to X card, it's pretty weak, and that's just draw to X in general is pretty weak. It gets beaten by most other forms of draw, but that's again just because it's a draw to X card, and that is just what happens with draw to X, unfortunately. But library has this very unique effect to it that can be really good, and you should pay attention to that. Now what we're going to do is we are going to go to the online client, and we're going to generate some base only games that have library in it, and we're going to assess how good it is. So what's going on here? So we have no trashing at all, we have no village at all, and we've got witch and labs. I mean, this is just a witch money game because there's just nothing to do here. You want to get as many witches as you can quickly, you want to play them all and put all the curses into your opponent's deck, and then you're just going to scrabble for golds and provinces, I guess. So witch and lab are the only cards you care about on this board, so no library here. Just ignore it completely on that board. So what's about this one? So here's the complete opposite. We have Chapel and Sentry to trash everything. And we have Festival. Festival combos really well with Library. We do have Village and Smithy. What are we going to be doing with the engine if we go Village Smithy? Well, the only thing that we have to play really is Remodel after that. So Festival is a very good card. Because nothing else is really that good, and that means Festival Library is going to be exceptionally good here. We can trash down everything and just draw a whole load of Festival Library. Now, eventually the provinces will kind of get in the way, but that doesn't really matter. It's still good enough that you can Festival Library, just seems really important. Just get a lot of money, buy a load of these, and consistently start double provincing. There's no other real way to get money other than treasures and festival, so I wouldn't really go above province, and maybe you would have a gold or two. You could get a remodel, and you could, turn. I mean, you've got Sentry to try and avoid provinces, maybe, but eventually you can try and turn some other cards into golds and remodel them into provinces. It's okay to play Remodel with Library because it shrinks your hand size and it gets another card out of your hand. So, Remodel could be nice, but I guess what are you going to remodel is the problem. So you might pick up some golds. But yeah, Library is the key draw card here. You'd actually pick it up over Smithy just because Festival is the only thing that's really going on this board. There's no other payload that you're doing, and that's just the perfect payload for Library. So sort of the rare case where you have other forms of draw, but actually you want the draw to X happened there. So here we have Festival Library again. We have Sentry to trash. The only draw is Library, is that what I'm seeing here? Yeah, it is. So you're definitely going to go Festival Library. That means Militia probably isn't that good, but you probably get one at the start just to try and stop your opponent getting a sentry and trashing down. And then once all that's done, you will probably workshop to get a load of throne rooms, because you really want to like throne festivals. And these together, festival and throne room, will give you so many coins that you can actually get build up to like triple province. Dare I say quad province. I don't think it's necessarily that good, because your opponent should be fighting you for these as well. But you can build big, and then you get a load of provinces, and then you have one turn only where you have to deal with those, and maybe then you can only double province. But you know what? That's still really good. If you do get militia, I guess you would probably stop playing it at some point, or maybe it doesn't matter. Like, you play it anyway. But yeah, so library being the only draw here, it's got the support that it needs. Throne room and festival together, and trashing. This is a great library board. So library, key card on this board here. So you can see that when library has the correct support, it does really well. But if it doesn't, then it just gets ignored. So what do we have here? We have sentry to trash down. We have village and throne room as villages. There is market. There is moat. What are we doing with library? Do we care about library? We have poacher that could be discarding to help us smooth library plays, and we got cellar as well. But the real question here is, what are we doing? Like, workshop can get moat and village, and that is draw. Because you have a way to trash down, you can just use village moat as draw instead, and that will let you keep increasing your hand size. You can throne the moats sometimes. You've got markets. There's a bunch of cantrips here that you want, and workshop picks these up. I think that you don't, when you think about market, it lets you buy a lot of cheap cards as well. You're mostly having to rely on money. You are going to need to pick up some golds to get a whole bunch of your money in this game, and that means that remodel and treasures start to become quite nice. So I think you ignore library here, and you would actually just instead build a village moat engine instead. That's just because it's so easy to amass these, and other forms of draw tend to work out. There's nothing that really goes nicely with library here. So even though moat is pretty poor draw, I think it would still be better than library overall, probably. Maybe you can fit like one in and hope to find it first, but I don't like a library there. And this is our last kingdom. So we have, this is very similar to the first one. We have no villages, but we do have sentry to trash, but otherwise witch is dominant here. What do you do other than witch? There is nothing to play other than witch and sentry. I guess you could try and keep clean with sentries and then go for some like nice merchant and silver. But the problem is that, what... There's no buy, so, it's only going to be so good anyway, but I guess that's probably what you do. You want to get a whole bunch of sentries and get very clean, and stay clean, and play a load of merchants, and then you're just playing like one witch per turn, and that's it, really. And you just try and buy one province per turn by doing that. But you need a lot of merchants, thinking about it. So I guess you would also get some golds. It seems it's just too slow to get a load of merchants. You're going to spend a long time buying merchants. But maybe you can do that with the witching. If you're junking your opponent with curses, I think you can probably get away with that. So you might go for a merchant and sentry cantrip kingdom, or you might go for some of these and then you pick up some gold for support as well. But it's really important that you trash a sentry. Library has no place on this board at all. Just it's no good. Right, so that was 5 kingdoms. As you can see, library needs other cards to support its particular form of drawing in order for library to be any good. But when you have that support, library can be excellent, to the point where sometimes, if the cards that are good with library are like the main payload as well, then, library can beat other forms of draw. But you saw we also had an engine where like moat felt like a better form of draw than library, just because library was too expensive and didn't really have anything going with it. So yeah, I think that's library. Draw to X in general, you just got to have the support to make it work. But when you can, it's pretty good. So that was all for Library. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.